Welcome back to FANSPLAINED, a media criticism podcast with Ryan and Em. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Em.
This week, we're continuing our deep dive exploration series into the MCU with 2019's Captain Marvel. Before we dig in, however, I want to issue a quick correction from last week. I erroneously stated that Hedy Lamarr invented the computer, which is not quite right. She was actually responsible for computing technologies that led to modern Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and more. So not computers in general, but much of what makes modern computing possible. Now with that out of the way, Captain Marvel is our topic of the week. We know this film is one of the more contentious entries into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we are also aware that our opinions may not be particularly popular ones. But we're here to look at each part of the MCU as its own production, as well as the larger connections to the franchise in general. Captain Marvel is the 21st entry into the MCU, but chronologically is our 5th official entry after Captain America, the Agent Carter one-shot, and each separate season of Marvel's Agent Carter. Set in both 1989 and 1995, this is one of the earliest chronological parts of the MCU story. Like Captain America, Captain Marvel utilizes flashbacks in an out-of-time sort of setting. However, the time span we see in this film is much shorter than 1945 to 2012. Captain Marvel's late release into the MCU means that it was produced by Marvel Studios as an official subsidiary of Walt Disney Studios, with Kevin Feige in charge of the MCU vision. In many ways, this film is like a melding of Captain America, the First Avenger, and Iron Man, both in terms of its greater connections to the MCU, as well as in character development and tone. Though not officially, Captain Marvel is essentially Marvel Studios' answer to Warner Bros.' release of Wonder Woman in 2017. However, Captain Marvel has been in development with Marvel since 2013 to 2014. 2013 saw an early script of Ms. Marvel. 2014 saw them trying to figure out how to fit her into the greater Marvel story.
Universe.
Yeah, the universe. Thank you. And this can be seen with its similarities to our preceding Captain, as well as the origin formula well established by Iron Man onward. Fitting, given that Wonder Woman is largely a World War I version of the First Avenger, with the gender roles reversed. Further highlighted by Agent Carter's use of Whitney Frost or Madame Mask in Season 2 and the visual similarities to Wonder Woman's Dr. Moreau. They're essentially the same visually.
Yeah, pretty much.
Except
one actually had a far better arc and more of a character than what we got in Wonder Woman.
That is true, as much as I love Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Captain Marvel is somewhat renowned for its long-time development issues plague, from script rewrites to staff changes to constant delays to contention over casting choices and even cast changes mid-production. Carol was originally slated to appear as early as Avengers Age of Ultron, though this was, blessedly, dropped due to lack of prior development for Carol in particular. There are other production issues with Captain Marvel, especially if you've been watching the MCU since Iron Man, really. They announced Captain Marvel as early as about 2015 or so, but it didn't come out until 2019, and it was delayed twice before even filming or official production or even casting announcements. First for Spider-Man Homecoming and its related complicated negotiations with Sony. Marvel really didn't have a choice. They had to be on Sony's timeline for that, or it wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. And then again for Ant-Man and the Wasp, which had to come out before Infinity War, unlike Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, basically you have the reference to Captain Marvel at the end of Infinity War, but Ant-Man and the Wasp basically set up the plot of what was going to happen in Endgame, so it pretty much had to come out before.
It's unfortunate, but yeah, it was delayed numerous times, as was Black Panther at the time.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's a blessing in disguise, because I think it fits better in the overall timeline. There's also just the fact that they tried to squeeze way too much way too much in general in Age of Ultron to set up further films.
Oh, Age of Ultron wouldn't have made any sense for Carol. There's a reason why they scrapped that, and Age of Ultron has its own issues, which we will get into in the Age of Ultron episode, that would not have been made any easier with an additional character.
I mean, it was already packed enough with too many characters as it was. Adding Captain Marvel along with Vision and Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver and
Ultron.
Yeah, like, that's too much. It's too much.
It's way too much. Also, despite contentious discussion, Captain Marvel was not only Marvel's first female-led film, but the first female-led superhero film to pass the $1 billion mark at the box office. The initial budget was about $175 million, so there is no technical way that this movie was a bomb for the studio or initial audiences, but we'll address the reception a little later in the episode. All that really says is that they made their money back, almost 10 times over?
Yeah. But it also goes to show that, I mean, they only had so much money as it was, and I think they really did the best with what they could, honestly. Because if you look at a lot of the other Marvel films, I don't know, maybe I could have my numbers wrong, but I think some of them probably got a bigger budget than Captain Marvel did.
I had numbers for Captain America at one point. Hold on. Anyway, Captain Marvel was also the 5th highest grossing film of 2019 and the 23rd top grossing film of all time upon release. That changes every year with new movies coming out, and they constantly surpass each other. But in 2019, it was the 23rd highest grossing film of all time. So,
and that was the same year that Endgame came out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that it was even that high on the list with Endgame coming out is like...
It's pretty close to Captain America's budget, actually. Captain America was 140 to 216. So, pretty, like, I'd say 200 sounds about standard-ish for something that's not an Avengers movie, probably. I imagine those get more money.
Yeah, I think the Avengers movies in general get more money.
I mean, they have to because they have much bigger casts. They have to pay a lot more people.
And their plots have gotten bigger and bigger per movie, really.
Yeah.
So when you look at the origin films, they are going to be on a smaller scale. But considering how much money they had and how much ground they literally had to cover in terms of, like, the galaxy and so much of the California coastline and then going to Louisiana, I think they did pretty good, actually.
Yeah. And they did that because I think that they also got a budget subsidy from California to go shoot certain things there, which is why they did that.
Yeah.
But they also reused certain sets from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to make things a little bit easier and not have to rebuild everything all the time when you already had this stuff that was being made. You already had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at that time doing stuff with the Kree and with Coulson, who makes a reappearance in this. So it makes sense to just kind of reuse certain things that are already being used at the same time. But Captain Marvel was directed by the then indie filmmaking duo of Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, whose prior work includes Half Nelson with Anthony Mackie, as well as Mississippi Burning. Do I have that right?
Yeah, Mississippi Burning.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that's the right name. I had like a sudden doubt moment. Mississippi Burning with Ben Mendelsohn, which directly led to their tapping Mendelsohn for his role here in Captain Marvel. Boden and Fleck's previous work also includes a lot of miscellaneous series for Showtime and HBO, which is really what led to their being hired for this. They're also still in talks to head up a, as of now, unnamed Disney Plus series. We're still not sure if this is Marvel adjacent or just a Disney Plus series. No one really knows yet. But they liked them enough to give them a show.
So basically they are indie filmmakers who were given a big budget movie and an action Marvel movie.
Yeah, and it's not the first time that Marvel has done this.
Yeah.
Not every director is going to come to them being Joe Johnston.
No.
right?
Or Taika
Waititi. Yeah, no. It's not going to happen. It'd be like getting mad that not every director in the cinematic universe was Quentin Tarantino if you had Quentin Tarantino come in and do a film, right?
Yeah, like...
They're not all going to feel that way.
They're not all going to be James Gunn, and they're not... And even Scott Derrickson people had, issue with him coming on to Doctor Strange, but then look at what he did. He managed to do a very good job considering he came from a horror background.
Mm-hmm.
And a horror indie background, too.
Yeah. Bowden, in particular, is credited by one of the film's other writers, Geneva Robertson-Dworet, as helping to define Carol's voice and personality, though both directors have additional writing credits, and this is because when they're directing, obviously, you end up changing parts of the script, things that don't work, you end up tweaking a lot of stuff.
And they end up getting credit for that as a result.
Yeah, which is why a lot of directors also have writing credits on films if they didn't literally write the film.
Yeah.
Initially, however, Ava DuVernay was in talks with Marvel to direct either Captain Marvel or Black Panther, but eventually she would bow out on both for other projects, including New Gods for DC, which she was working on as of 2018, which was about the time they were working on the bulk of Captain Marvel. Unfortunately, New Gods, which is kind of like the DC version of Eternals,
yeah,
because Kirby worked on both of them,
yeah,
was scrapped effectively as of 2021, mostly because DC's kind of abandoned the Snyderverse.
Yeah, which, I mean, it sucks for the people that were working on that.
Yeah, that one actually sounded cool.
But at the same time, it might be another blessing in disguise, because if they break away from the Snyderverse, that means they can actually do other things in a different way.
Sure, and they can start off the DCEU with a consistent start and end point. I don't know if they will. It's a mess by this point. I don't even know if you could ever call anything like a collective universe over there without fully rebooting everything.
I mean, that's pretty much what they have to do now, because they were too busy rushing to, stay even on the remote same path that Marvel was.
Which is further complicated by the Aquaman sequel, the Shazam sequel, the Wonder Woman sequel, Birds of Prey being attached to Suicide Squad. Like, are we going with the James Gunn verse of DC? I have no idea what they're doing. I mean, we'll get to DC if we ever get to DC, but messy.
Very messy.
In terms of the film's writing, back to Captain Marvel, the story is credited to Nicole Perlman and Meg LaFauve. There we go. I can talk. Who worked on the initial treatments of the film through a good portion of pre-production. LaFauve left to work on Gigantic with Disney and had previously worked on films such as Inside Out for Pixar. Perlman left shortly afterward and has prior MCU experience as she co-wrote Guardians of the Galaxy with James Gunn. Mm-hmm. She also ended up doing a prequel sort of comic series that was like a Gamora solo. It was fairly short-lived, if I remember right, but she did end up doing it because people liked her work on Guardians so much.
But I feel like a lot of people forget she actually did help write that first movie.
Well, it's because James Gunn generally gets all of the credit because he's the director and he's the easier name to remember, so he tends to be the one that gets all the credit for that when, no, he's not. Afterward, Robertson-Dworet, whose only prior credit was the Tomb Raider reboot in 2018, was brought on for the screenplay and worked closely with the directors on dialogue, as we've noted. Mm-hmm. Additional screenplay assistance was also done by Jack Schaefer, who was previously hired for Black Widow, and she also did the writing for some episodes of WandaVision, and will be working on the WandaVision spin-off Agatha House of Harkness, which is supposedly supposed to be out this year. We'll see if that actually happens.
Well, I'm willing to bet I'll probably like that better than I liked WandaVision.
We'll get to that.
Unfortunately, we will have to get to that. Ugh.
So, Captain Marvel follows the journey of a Kree Star Force warrior, Veers, who is at a loss when it comes to her past, and has been working with Star Force for the better part of the past 6 years.
Star Force.
Star Force. With her mentor, Jan Rog, and the rest of the Star Force team, Veers is thrust into the Kree's ongoing conflict with another alien species known as the Skrull. The Skrull have an interesting shape-shifting ability, throwing the identity of anyone and everyone into question. During a mission to rescue a Kree operative, Veers discovers said operative was, in fact, a Skrull in disguise and is captured and her memory heavily interrogated by the Skrull against her will. This invasive dive into her mind triggers questionable visions or supposed memories for Veers, and she breaks out of Skrull captivity only to be tossed down to Earth, the next stop for the Skrulls to discover secret technology to aid in the Kree-Skrull war. Out of her element, and a little out of her own mind, Veers eventually teams up with then S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and somewhat rookie, Nick Fury, to find this technology before the Skrulls do. Along the way, Veers discovers her actual identity and previous life on Earth as an Air Force pilot named Carol Danvers. In this search, Danvers is introduced to her previous best friend Maria Rambeau and her young daughter Monica. This journey also leads Danvers to other mind-breaking discoveries, including the real intentions of the Skrull, how she came upon her superpowers, and what led her from Earth to the Kree Star Force. Captain Marvel stars Brie Larson as Carol Danvers / Captain Marvel, and has Samuel L. Jackson reprising his role as Nicholas J. Fury. And it's a big note that we don't call him Nicholas, we call him Fury. What does your mother call you? Fury. What do you call your mother?
Fury.
Ben Mendelsohn joins the MCU as Talos, the leader of the Skrull, and Jude Law plays Carol's Star Force mentor Jan Rog. The film also introduces Gemma Chan as Minerva ahead of her appearance as Cersei in Eternals.
And she's blue in this one.
Yes, she is. And a completely different person. They are not at all related.
No.
Not at all. Daimon... Did I say that right?
Daimon Honshu.
Thank you. Daimon Honshu. Reprising his role from Guardians of the Galaxy as Korath. Lashana Lynch as Maria Rambeau. And Annette Bening as Dr. Larson and Marvell. The film is also loaded with cameos. A lot of cameos. Such as Lee Pace coming back as Ronan prior to his radicalization in Guardians of the Galaxy. And Clark Gregg returning as Agent Coulson. Additionally, the film includes a cameo from consultant and modern Captain Marvel comics writer Kelly Sue DeConnick, as well as one of the final cameos by Stan Lee, who can be seen memorizing his script for Mallrats, which also came out in 1995.
And then this is also the movie that has the opening Marvel logo, just comprised purely of Stan Lee images and clips. And I am not ashamed to say I cried again watching this. I cried the first time I saw it, and I cried again rewatching it because it's beautiful, it's perfect, it's very rude.
Yes.
And it's very upsetting, and I miss Stan, and I'm glad that they did it, though.
Yes. It was very sweet.
Yes.
This isn't actually the only homage or tribute that Captain Marvel has in it. Captain Marvel not only consulted heavily with the Air Force and former / current pilots to give the film its proper feel and personality, but some of these pilots make cameos as themselves inside the film. You don't really notice them a lot. They're just kind of background. None of them are like that jerk dude that is talking to Carol about the cockpit.
Mm-hmm.
No, but like they kind of appear as themselves in like background shots on the Air Force Base and stuff.
That's cool.
These cameos include Thunderbirds pilots Matthew Spider Kimmel and Stephen Cajun Del Bogno. Del Bogno, unfortunately, could not contribute to the film's release as he passed away in a training accident in 2018, like right after he'd concluded his work on the film.
Oh, that's sad.
They were doing like a training exercise on an air show, and he couldn't pull the plane out of a dive.
Oh, no.
And it crashed.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's awful.
So Captain Marvel not only thanks the Thunderbirds and all these other pilots in the credits, because you see with special thanks to specific pilots who did stuff for the film, but one of the early flashback scenes for Carol has this specific but very quick image of like a burning piano in the montage. And this is actually a traditional send-off for fighter pilots who have, quote, flown west, according to air show stuff. So this is This is a common send-off for pilots who pass away in duty.
No.
And that's why they included it, but also this would be a thing that Carol, as an Air Force pilot, would recognize, and it would be an image that works in line with her character as well.
Yeah.
So they actually used that specific piano burning in her flashback montages. And then on top of that, there was also a tribute flyover for the Hollywood premiere in Del Bagno's honor. They also, like, flew over his home, which was in California, and they went from there to Hollywood. Yeah. And that's how they did, like, the flyover. So this was definitely a film that included a lot of tributes on top of its 9,000 cameos.
Yes.
Other cast for Captain Marvel also includes McKenna Grace as tween Carol, and her prior work is extensive, and I wasn't expecting it. I was like, I kind of recognize her name, but I don't know why. So when I went and looked it up, she is very well known for playing younger versions of characters in other franchises, such as The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, The Vampire Diaries, Once Upon a Time, and even in the recent Malignant, which came out last year? Yeah, it was last year.
Yes, it came out last year.
She also stars in Annabelle Comes Home and in Ghostbusters Afterlife, among a very long list of credits.
Because nowadays you have a lot of stories and movies being centered around children or child actors, and it's actually very hard to find a child actor that can carry a film or be a main character and actually, deliver a good performance. So I think the reason why she has so many credits is because she is a very good actress for her age, and we
loved Annabelle Comes Home.
Yeah, people saw that and they were like, "Oh, damn, get on this. Who is this?"
I mean, James Wan's put her in 2 different movies now.
Yeah, she was great in Annabelle Comes Home.
Yeah, I loved that movie.
I think she was one of the best things about that movie. And we went into that movie
expecting it to be Annabelle.
Suck. We expected it to suck, and we actually really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah,
and I think one of the main reasons it was so good was because of her performance.
I remember we kept going on about how much we loved Judy.
Yeah, she was great.
And she also looks extremely different when she's blonde to when she's brunette.
Yes.
Which is why I did not initially recognize her.
I didn't recognize her in the Ghostbusters trailer at all because of her hair and the glasses. And
they made her look so much like Finn Wolfhard.
Well, they're making her look like their grandpa, who is the guy with the glasses in Ghostbusters. Finkman, I think.
Finkman? I don't remember. It's been a very long time since I watched Ghostbusters.
I know, this is going to be a damage to our credit here. We don't know. We can't remember the original
Well, we didn't watch Ghostbusters Afterlife, to be fair. We just know that it's a credit for...
It hasn't come out yet.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Regardless, we have not seen that yet.
Ghostbusters are not our focus, but my point is that they made her look so much like that actor that I did not recognize her at all. So, good on them, I guess.
Monica Rambeau is also portrayed in both younger in flashback photos, and then in the film by real-life siblings, Azari and Akira Akbar. And Akira Akbar plays the Monica that we see moving on film. She's like current Monica, and then her younger sibling played the same character in all the photos,
that is
so
really
that you
cool.
have this visual consistency.
I love that, actually.
It's really cute.
That is a really good... That was a solid casting choice. Good.
Especially in a film that is obsessive with its de-aging technology.
Yes. They were
which I'll get to later, but...
You know what? Let's just do this so we don't have yet another person to de-age.
Well, and it would be a lot harder to do that with, like, a 10-year-old than somebody...
Well, I mean, they did manage to do an It Chapter 2.
Sort of.
No, they did.
Yeah, right.
They did. They did a pretty good job, considering.
You also have, like, a lot of weird connections in this film, such as... First off, Keanu Reeves was actually offered the role of Jan Rog and turned it down before they ever went to Jude Law.
Because he was too busy doing John Wick. He's like, I have my own cinematic universe now.
Well, he's also in The Matrix. What does he need this for?
I have 2 cinematic universes now.
He knows Kung Fu, and he's not bringing it to this movie.
And we're not counting Speed, because he was only in one of those movies, damn it.
But in taking the part, Jude Law actually went and talked a lot to Robert Downey Jr. about entering Marvel and what that all meant, because he'd worked pretty extensively with RDJ on Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, and they get along really well from what I've heard.
Mm-hmm. And Brie Larson was actually the one advocating for Samuel L. Jackson's involvement in Captain Marvel due to their prior experience on Kong Skull Island, which they also are in with Tom Hiddleston.
Loki'd in there. And also, John C. Reilly's also on Kong Skull Island, and he was in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh my god, you're right. I didn't know that he was in that because I haven't seen it.
Everything is connecting. Well, you are going to see it because we own it now.
Yeah, so. Well, I mean, Marvel is the
welcome.
biggest ruiner of the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game that I've ever seen in my life. Like, the meta is so extensive that 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon no longer works. Because if you are acting in Hollywood with any kind of famous name, chances are you're going to end up in the MCU or somewhat connected to the MCU at some point eventually.
You are going to end up in the MCU, or you're going to end up in Star Wars.
Especially if you're a British actor.
Or you're
because all of those people know each other and they're all in Marvel now.
Or you're going to end up in the DC universe. You're going to end up in one of these universes making 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon an absolutely useless game now.
I'm just waiting for Jason Momoa to show up in the MCU now. I don't know as who.
But that would be my question, is like, who would he be though?
Make him Namor. He can just be, he can be Marvel Aquaman.
Hot, beefy Namor.
Except the Namor is not, like that at all.
I know, that's what I mean. Make him hot, beefy Namor.
Make him Wolverine.
No, make him Sabretooth.
Okay, I'm fine with that too.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that too.
He's too
Put him in X-Men, it's great.
He's too big to be Wolverine. He's better as Sabretooth.
I mean, to be fair, so is Hugh Jackman, but they did it anyway.
They did force perspective to make him shorter.
I mean, they're gonna do that with everybody.
Namor Loken is just a tiny little... He's a tiny little shrimp. In the comics, he's supposed to be around the same height as Natasha.
Yeah.
That's how tiny he is. And no one really knows that he's just a fucking bulldog of a man going around. And
snicked. Rawr.
Regenerating at will.
Oh. Lashana Lynch was also one of the actors that replaced one of the departing actors during production. Maria. I always confuse their names.
They're both M names.
Maria was supposed to be played by an actress named DeWanda Wise, but she had to leave for prior scheduling conflicts. She was, like, starring in a TV show that she couldn't leave. So she ended up having to leave Captain Marvel, and then they hired Lashana Lynch instead.
Who then went on to be the new James Bond, or the new 007.
That effectively makes her the new James Bond.
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned, she's the chick Bond. I'm into it.
She is the chick Bond, and she is very good at what she does.
Yes.
Someday we might...
I loved her in that movie.
Someday we might actually cover the
Bond movies? The Craig Bond movies?
I only want to cover the Craig Bond movies. I'm gonna say it. I only care about Craig Bond.
Well, to be fair, there are a lot of Bond movies, and there are a lot of misses with Bond movies.
And the Craig Bond movies are really the only one that have, like, an actual...
character arc and development.
Yeah, they have an actual continuity that other Bond movies do not. Pretty much all the other Bond movies do not have.
They're all very episodic. Very, very episodic.
That's probably why I could never get in them.
I mean, that's fair. Is there anything else with the acting that you want to get into? Acting specifically, not story.
My unpopular opinion, I actually really liked Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. I liked her as Captain Marvel, and I liked her as Carol Danvers. I think she gets into both of them really well. I think she is one of those actresses that, to me, earned every inch of that Oscar that she won by her role in Room. Like, she knows what it's like to actually play someone who has been in a very traumatic situation. And she's having to play someone who is an amnesiac, who is being brainwashed, who is being gaslit, who
has an incredible amount of trauma.
Yeah. And yet, at the same time, is also being trained and taught to be emotionless.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet, those emotions keep coming through. Like, in her, wisecracks, in her backtalk, in her anger, in her recklessness. Like, there's all of this shit coming through in her performance. And I feel like a lot of people just were not paying attention to it at all.
I'll get into that more when we get into, like, public perception stuff, but I do agree with you, like...
I also really loved Ben Mendelsohn as the Skrull.
Oh, he's so cute.
He really is.
I want him in, like, everything. He's so great.
I know.
I want him and Christoph Waltz in everything.
Yes, they elevate everything they're in, honestly. And because see, here's the thing. When the whole Skrull thing came out in the Marvel comics, I did not give a damn about him. I didn't care about him until this movie with Ben Mendelsohn playing the lead Skrull and actually getting to see, his family and see this story arc, and I did not give a shit about them until now.
Which is funny because
they're pretty much
the Skrulls were held up for years and years and years, and they couldn't use them because it was attached to I think it was attached to the Fantastic Four. It was attached to one of the franchises that they licensed out and did not have rights to until they bought all the franchises back.
Yep.
So they couldn't actually use Skrulls in anything else, which is why a lot of other movies like Avengers and whatever will, like, replace out other, like, fill-in villains because they didn't have the Skrulls available to use. They couldn't.
Yeah. When the Skrulls have been in, like, the Marvel comic universe for a long time, it kind of felt like they were the go-to villains for a lot of that shit because they could literally be anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And you could do a lot of fuckery with that.
I can see how they would have wanted that ahead of time for Avengers to lead into, like, the Hydra reveal.
Yeah.
That would have been pretty neat.
It would have been.
But there's the MCU that could have been, and there's the MCU that is, and there's a lot of weird things about the MCU that could have been.
Well, the great thing...
Which we'll get into with other movies as well.
Well,
but
the great thing about the multiverse opening up is that now a lot of those possibilities could very well...
God only knows what we're going to see with Doctor Strange later this year.
Oh, I'm so hyped for that shit. Mm-hmm. I also, I loved Samuel L. Jackson in this. I loved Goose. I loved that.
Goose is played by 4 different cats.
Cats.
2 of them are named after Muppets, and I am in love with this cat.
Yes.
In love.
This beautiful, fluffy, squishy-looking orange tabby.
I love it. But yes, there are 2 cats named Rizzo and Gonzo that played Goose, on top of 2 others, and I don't remember what the names were. I had them written down somewhere, but
wasn't one of them Ricardo?
No, it was an R name, but it wasn't that. It was like...
It's adorable, though.
They're very cute. They're very, very cute.
And I loved that we found out Nick Fury was a cat person.
My favorite. I also have sneaky things to say about Nick Fury, but not until we get to Age of Ultron, because I don't want to spoil it now. I want to wait till we get there and confirm it before I say anything. Reggie and Archie were the 2 other cats.
Oh, those are from the comics, though, right? From the Archie comics? Because one is named Archie. And
I don't know what Reggie is.
Yeah, Reggie was, like, Archie's nemesis for Veronica and Betty's admiration.
I only don't remember this because my only contemporary exposure to Archie comics is Riverdale, and I do not remember that character, if that character exists, because they made Jughead everything.
No, Jughead existed. Reggie is, like, the douche bro that often competed with Archie.
To be fair, I pay as little attention to Archie in that show as possible.
Well,
Archie is the one thing I don't pay attention to.
No, I'm not even talking about the show Riverdale, which is an absolute turd on fire. I'm talking about the comics purely because I used to collect Sonic the Hedgehog comics when I was a kid.
Gotta go fast.
I would always see those not only in the stand with the Sonic comic books, but also they literally have those fucking ads for all the Archie shit in those comic books. That's
Well,
how
34 minutes before I noticed our first swear this time.
Oh, I sweared a few minutes before.
Yeah, you know what? It's fine. Is that all we need on acting?
Yeah, I think. Oh no, Annette Bening.
Oh, God.
For as small as her role was, I loved her in it.
Yes.
I loved her.
She was great.
Yes.
Did I forget to mention her above? I bet I did. No, I didn't.
No, you didn't.
I didn't.
It's just, it is a small role, but I think she did very well in that small role, and I'm very glad she was in it.
I loved her in it.
Yeah.
She was very cute.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say on the acting, in that I
Other
really
than Brie Larson was great, and we don't agree with all of this wooden acting nonsense.
She was so wooden. What the fuck was wooden about her, really?
We'll get there, but I've witnessed the wooden acting conversations of the Star Wars prequels, and I could already argue with you about that. I'm not giving anybody an inch on this one.
No. Like, you could make an argument for that in the prequels, sure.
Except that I could still argue it, but... and I will.
It does not exist here.
Absolutely not. It's nonsense.
She fucking cries. She fights crying. She smiles. She laughs. She does a lot of shit here. I focused really hard on her expressions. I focused really hard on her acting this time.
Well, and the inconsistencies are the point of her story.
Yeah.
So
also,
the argument that her acting is inconsistent and her personality is inconsistent is the point?
There's also
it's literally the point.
There's also the fact that, if you were fucking amnesiac, you were an amnesiac.
Uh-huh.
How do you think you would act if you didn't know where you came from or what your life was like? A lot of our personality is built on our experiences. It's built on what we know. It's built on who we know of ourselves and what we know of ourselves.
Well, and the fact that Carol was able to build a personality not knowing any of that. She was already able to build a personality on top of that. That speaks to a lot of personal interior strength, regardless of what she remembers.
Yeah.
So, again, we'll get to that when we get to public reception. This is gonna be one of the only episodes that has this, because it's one of the only ones that sadly warrants it.
Yeah. I mean, we did open with this was a divisive film.
It's extremely divisive.
It just feels like a lot of the criticism comes from... It doesn't come from a genuine place. It kind of it feels all very dismissive.
They're all really bad faith arguments.
Yeah.
That's really what it feels like to me.
Because I think this movie kind of felt like it might have been set up to fail just because the expectations on it were so gargantuanly high that it was never going to meet everybody's expectations.
Yeah, but again, the loud people on the internet are not the public as a whole. And the loud people on the internet tend to forget that.
Also, the loud people on the internet tend to forget that some of their opinions can just, be plain garbage and not have any actual basis in reality.
Well, that's also the problem, is opinions are opinions. They're not objective fact.
Which,
We're not talking about the Emoji Movie, right? Which is objectively terrible.
Yes.
This is not an objectively terrible film. It can be subjectively terrible for people who don't like it, but that does not make it objectively bad.
Film and art in general is subjective. You are going to have your own opinions, but those opinions also are shaped by your experiences. And I feel it. I mean, the same argument could be made towards Black Panther. That film is not going to mean anything to you the same way that if you are white...
If you have that lived experience, it's going to mean something more to you than it is to somebody who does not have that lived experience.
So all these, guys, and yes, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go here, which I shouldn't really apologize for anyway, because they were not apologetic at all about their fucking opinions. If you are a guy and you're coming into this movie... You are not going to have these same experiences that Carol had, and you're definitely not going to have the same experiences that we have had entering fandom in general.
Exactly. Like, some of the arguments, and we did watch a lot of the arguments before doing this episode. Some of the arguments come straight down to, well, there's no way an actual man would say that. Except, yes, they absolutely do.
Like, you've clearly never been around military guys if you think
I just mean dudes in general. That thing about needing to smile more happens all the time. Catcalling happens all the time. But yeah, have any of you dudes actually watched Top Gun in the last 10 years? And how much of that dialogue in the bars is centered on people's cocks?
Yeah, it's long.
My God.
It's long and extensive, like my Johnson. Like,
I mean, to be fair, like, ignoring how homoerotic that film is.
It's incredibly
because it's extremely homoerotic.
It's so gay.
So much of it is just centered on their dicks.
It is. And a lot of it is also basically...
That line about, that's why they call it a cockpit. I've heard that said that that's entirely unrealistic. No, it isn't.
It is not unrealistic.
So I guess we're getting to this now and not later. Fine.
Yeah.
I'll get to public perception now because we're already here. So we already have Larson's wooden acting versus Carol's trauma and her mental state and brainwashing in general. Kree doctrine is a lot like the Borg. It's not quite exactly the same, but it's very similar because they have a lot of public consciousness.
Like, I find it really funny
emphasis.
that one of the major points of contention, one of the arguments against her is that she's very meh, she's very blah, she's very wooden, when it's like they're literally training her
to not have a personality.
Yeah, and to be emotionless and to obey orders and all this shit. She's literally being trained to be a Borg, to be a Kree.
Well, and you brought up an interesting point a minute ago when you said you weren't going to apologize or you shouldn't apologize because none of these other people apologize first. That's part of the reason they don't like Carol. Because she doesn't apologize. You give, like, Tony Stark's character marks to a woman, and suddenly she is emotionless. She's cold. She's bitchy. She's bossy.
She frowns too much.
She frowns too much. She's not sexy enough. Tony Stark doesn't apologize for shit. We don't give him guff for anything. But Carol doesn't apologize for anything, and suddenly she doesn't have a personality. She's bitchy. She's awful. She doesn't care about other people. I'm sorry, did we care about that with Tom Cruise and Top Gun? No, we fucking didn't.
No, people loved him for it. And it's like, she's not doing anything in this movie that several other of the other Marvel superheroes haven't done in their own fucking movies.
Carol is essentially the amalgamation of Steve and Tony in a single character.
Yeah. She's just Air Force instead of the Army.
Yeah. That's all it is. She has Tony's bravado, and she has Steve's empathy. And you shove that together, and you get Carol.
She has the stubbornness, the recklessness. She has the impulsivity.
And Steve absolutely has a lot of that, and a lot of people tend to forget that in later MCU adaptations, that Steve is messy. Steve's allowed to be messy.
No.
The whole point of Steve is that he is human, and that's also the whole story of Captain Marvel here, is that she's human. She's not Kree. She is not part of this cultural, collective mindset of obedience. And she was never going to be, and that's precisely what got her into that situation in the first place.
Like, yeah, she is emotional, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like,
and that's how she ends up with Mar-Vell.
And
is because Mar-Vell rebelled against
and isn't
the Kree.
Isn't that, like, the whole fucking argument that, you know, women are too emotional, or these female characters are too emotional?
Yeah, and then suddenly she's emotionless and wooden. I'm sorry, what is it you want then?
Yeah, what is it that you want? Do you want female characters that show their emotions? Do you want them to be stoic, badass bitches? You know,
because I'd argue that
chew
this
bubblegum
film
and take names. Like, which is it?
I'd argue that this film is really not that different from Wonder Woman. You still have a character who's coming in and kicking a lot of ass.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman's costume's just skimpier.
Yeah, she shows a lot more skin because she comes from a literal
Is that
island.
what it is? Is it because she coos over babies, so we give it to her instead of Carol arguably does the same thing by being an aunt to Monica.
And being supportive of Maria being a single mother.
Right.
And having a kid on her own.
There was also that comment that Lashana Lynch's acting was bad when, no. You are objectively wrong.
You are very much wrong.
You're objectively wrong.
The
fact that she did all of that
movies.
research with specific Air Force pilots who were also mothers and brought that into her performance, and you can see it. Like, yeah, they talk about stuff. That's the whole point, though. Like, you can see the raw emotion in her face when she's talking about how she lost her best friend. She thought her best friend was dead.
Yeah, she lost her support system that got her through
everything. And then she's finding out that not only is Carol fine, but Carol remembers coming from an alien fucking planet. I'd say that Maria handles that a hell of a lot better than Tony Stark did.
Yeah, Tony Stark got fucking PTSD. Meanwhile, Carol, like, is anybody
we give Carol no consideration for having any kind of issues like that, despite the fact that she has heavy trauma, and you have that whole heartbreaking part where she's confirming that everything she knew was a lie and doubting everything about herself.
And then remembering just how difficult of a life she has had to live.
Mm-hmm. And that whole sequence of her just getting back up is just tears down my face.
The way people want to act like that's so heavy-handed feminist agenda. No, it fucking isn't.
How is it any different from Steve's I can do this all day? How is it any different?
It's literally that. It's literally I can do this all day. But it's showing very clearly how she has had to go her whole life proving that she can stand with the boys.
Which is exactly the point of the ending. It is not anticlimactic. All she does is pull an Indiana Jones and everyone hates her for it. Bullshit.
Harrison Ford did and everybody loved it, but she doesn't. Oh, it's anticlimactic. No, it isn't.
It's anticlimactic. There's no emotion in it. She doesn't have anything to prove to Jan Rog, and Carol doesn't have anything to prove to you.
Yeah, that is the point. Is that she doesn't have to prove a damn thing anymore to anybody. That is the climax.
Exactly, and that is literally her I know my value moment.
Like, I'm so fucking sorry, it's not a beam in the sky that you wanted.
No, like, Captain Marvel is essentially what you get if you merge Peggy's story with Steve's.
Yeah.
With a little bit of Tony's bravado, so you insert Howard in there as well, right? But she has Peggy's story of having to deal with this male-dominated environment that has no space for her, and going on and doing stuff on her own. Literally the same story. And then you have Steve's, where you are wrestling with your morals, being given these powers that you don't really know what to do with, have people trying to convince you of other shit, have people telling you you're constantly not good enough for things, getting up and doing it anyway. Mm-hmm. And we see that with Carol several times. There are times when she almost walks away from Fury and then stops herself and goes back for him.
Yeah.
She does that a lot.
Because she actually cares.
Well, and if you're doing a story about not having access to 90% of your potential, because again, you're being gaslit and brainwashed and held captive, basically.
And literally controlled.
Yeah, you're being held captive, essentially. And then having access to that suddenly, it's not out of the realm of possibility that she'd suddenly know what she was doing. Because she has access to her full potential at that point. She's already used to the 10% of it. Once she has access and you remove that firewall...
Part of the whole issue
rest of it makes complete sense to me.
Part of the whole thing with Mary Sue's is that Mary Sue's are fucking perfect. You know, they don't have any flaws. They can do everything.
They're either perfect or they have nothing but flaws and you're supposed to accept it anyway.
Carol has flaws. Her being able to excel at what she actually loves, what she has a passion for, that is not her being a Mary Sue. It's her remembering her love of flying. It's her remembering all of her training. It's her remembering all of the shit that she's already done and, again, already proven that she could do.
Yeah, like, she doesn't have anything else to prove. Not to Jude Law and not to the audience.
No, and
I feel that that's going to resonate with women who are used to exactly that narrative versus someone who's never had to prove their place in anything.
Yeah, and I think that is what it is. It's the fact, it all comes back to what experiences you have experienced, what you bring to that movie, because it's going to color your reaction to that movie.
Yeah.
You may try to make the argument that no, you're not doing that and everything, but no, everything is colored by our experiences, whether we want to believe that or not. Mm-hmm. How we control our reaction, sure. You can do that. But the thing is that if you are a man, mm-hmm. if you're a man and you've never had to go through these things, where you've never had to truly prove that you could be all of these things, to prove your worth,
yeah,
then you aren't going to, then of course you're going to look at this movie and think it's boring or not get it, because it doesn't really mean anything to you.
And maybe it's not for you.
Yeah, maybe it's not for you. And that's, you know what, that's okay too. Because all these, like, Transformers movies and shit, they're not made for me. They're made for guys who like that shit. And that's okay too. You can have your movies. Guess what? We can have ours. And for all of the centuries that women have been putting up with an irregular amount of bullshit and injustice and straight up bigotry, you guys can deal with us having a few superhero movies made for us.
And the thing is nobody's taking away all the 9 million dude superhero or hero in general movies that exist already.
Fuck, even Top Gun had, like, what, 2 women characters, and the rest of the cast was all men.
Yeah, one of them was Meg Ryan, who sits and grieves over her husband, and the other one was Tom Cruise's love interest, who is very, very Peggy without the Agent Carter end of Peggy.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, us having Captain Marvel and liking Captain Marvel isn't taking anything away from you. You don't like it? Fine. You don't have to like it.
Nope.
I'm just saying I think your criticism is...
It's bad.
I think think it's dismissive. I think it's coming from it's coming from a place where you don't really know what you're talking about.
It's coming from a place of not really understanding. There's a difference between not liking something, totally valid, and calling it objectively bad because you didn't like it.
Yeah,
those are not the same thing.
You cannot like this movie, but just because you don't like it, that doesn't mean it's a bad movie.
No, and arguably, it's not. It made its money like 10 times over.
Like, I don't like Iron Man 3. Plenty of people like that movie. That doesn't mean it's a bad film. It just had a lot to be desired for me.
I'd argue that Age of Ultron is actually an objectively bad film.
Yes,
but
Age of
we'll
Ultron.
get there.
Age of Ultron is the shitty Marvel movie, and I dare any of you to change my mind. You won't. Spoilers.
But also claiming that. I find a lot of it is, well, I want to review this without getting into the politics of it. And then you immediately get into the politics of it by buying into all of this nonsense. You get into gender politics with Brie Larson as Wooden. This was unnecessary. This was too obvious. Whatever.
Guys,
you're not the arbiter of what's necessary.
Plenty of people could argue that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is fucking unnecessary, and guess what?
That's probably true.
It's still here. It's still going.
I mean, that's you could argue that many things are unnecessary, but not connecting with it without the lived experience of it is not the same as it being unnecessary. Just because you have not lived an experience where you've been waiting for someone to tell you exactly these things your entire life doesn't make it bad. I find it very convenient that the films that we have these arguments over are Black Panther and effectively the 2 films about women taking their personal agency back from being mind-controlled and brainwashed.
Again, if you think this movie was boring and pointless, it's not for you.
Yeah, and that's fine.
That's fine. We can have movies that are for us, and, there are plenty of movies that you guys can have that you love.
It's really not
but again,
outspokenly feminist or whatever.
It's
like,
not.
it's really not. It could be a lot more heavy-handed than it is.
God forbid we have a movie, about a superhero.
It's heavy-handed because it uses No Doubt over a fight sequence. I'm sorry, but that song drop is fucking great.
And it's fitting.
It's
not obvious or cliche.
No,
it's
actually not
fitting.
I can also make arguments about
honestly,
the music, because there are a lot of arguments that the 90s music...
Could you have imagined if they had actually used Spice Girls in that movie? I would have lost my fucking mind.
I mean, it's a year too early for Wannabe.
I'll tell you what I want when
it's
I
a year
really
too early! Now, Black Widow was set in 96. If that one could have used the Spice Girls, would have lost it.
Yeah, we spent 15 minutes in the 90s in that movie. It was
and you got American Pie instead.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's a good song.
Yeah, it's fine. But with the music, there's an argument that a lot of the 90s music in there is misplaced. It's not used well because it doesn't fit into the story the way Guardians of the Galaxy does. One, if it had, you'd be arguing that it was too much like Guardians of the Galaxy. Mm-hmm. Two, I can make an argument that actually the use of the music ramps up the more and more Carol comes into her own, and it is actually used as a storytelling device. Because we start with no 90s stuff at all because she's in space. Why would you? And then you start only hearing the 90s stuff overheard in people's car stereos. Or, I think it's just car stereos to begin with.
The more she
the more she remembers, the more the music is integrated into the soundtrack rather than just stereos and radios and whatever else. It's used as a storytelling device as Carol comes into more of her agency and personal understanding. That is why that Nirvana cue, the minute she goes in to Supreme Intelligence talking with fake Annette Bening, is a literal art. It is a literal art.
Especially the song choice, Come As You Are.
It's so good.
It's very intentionally chosen.
If you cry every time, me pushing the like button every time. And I think we've gotten through most of the, there's also the twist was obvious, but I have to also argue that, this doesn't really matter when the twist of the plot being the plight of refugees being framed as terrorists was not only incredibly salient in 2019, it's still incredibly salient now.
Yes.
Not only the politics are going to feel different in Captain Marvel because this was 2019. This was mid-Trump era, mid all of not letting refugees into the country, mid trying to build a border wall, mid everything he did against foreign powers that was just awful. The politics of Captain Marvel and even Phase 3 in general are going to look incredibly different from Phase 1 and Phase 2. When you had Obama in office, the politics are going to look different.
Yeah. And you're also talking about people's attitudes in the 90s as portrayed in the film.
Yeah.
And it's actually very telling that that attitude from the 90s is still floating around now.
Yeah. The story is important no matter which part of it you're looking at. I'm sorry. That may be boring to you if that's not a thing that interests you. Whatever. But that doesn't make it bad. That doesn't make it heavy-handed.
No. It just means that it was not for you. And it's not a film that you had any real response to. Except, being like, oh, well, it was boring. Again, your expectations of this film were very different than what people who were making it wanted it to be.
Well, and in the immortal words of Sam Jackson,
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
I don't know how else to sum that up.
Yeah.
Really. So back to the actual film. Like Captain America before it, Captain Marvel effectively stands on its own. It does. Despite feeding into a lot of, like, MCU lore and chronological sequels, it does feed into a lot of stuff around it, but you can watch Captain Marvel and not really have to know about a whole lot else. It might help you to know kind of what S.H.I.E.L.D. is and stuff, but chronologically, we haven't seen S.H.I.E.L.D. formed on screen yet, other than Sam Jackson just being like, well, I'm part of S.H.I.E.L.D., Captain America, come hang out.
Yeah, every time we have seen S.H.I.E.L.D. in these movies, it has already been formed and running.
Yeah, so there's really not a lot of stuff that you needed to know prior. The only thing that shows up from Captain America to here is the Tesseract, and I do have story questions about how it got there and how Dr. Lawson's clearance with the Air Force / NASA worked in conjunction with S.H.I.E.L.D. and how she got in touch with Howard's shit in order to get the Tesseract, but whatever.
Maybe
it's literally been, 50 years from Captain America to this? Literally 50 years, because it was 45 to 95.
Well, also, Howard died, like, when, early 80s or something?
Yeah, this was about the time that Howard died. This is also, like, the 89 setting for the flashback part of Captain Marvel is a year after Peter Quill disappears. Also, so you have, like, all these weird connections, but you don't necessarily have to have watched really anything other than maybe Captain America to understand, but, like, people mention the Tesseract, like, they don't mention it in conjunction with Captain America at all. It's simply the power core of the thing that, like, the thing that changed Captain Marvel into what she is.
Yeah.
So you don't really need to know anything from Captain America about it at all. It doesn't really change anything.
No.
So it effectively stands on its own. And additionally, like Captain America, one of its post-credit scenes feeds directly into the following Avengers movie, though this one is with an actual scene versus an extremely dated movie trailer.
Yes. Very.
Also, like the first Avenger, Captain Marvel is an effective period piece, even if the 90s often feel a little too close to contemporary settings for those of us who lived through the 90s. It's really hard to... Really, for me, I didn't remember it feeling very 90s at all the first time I watched it, because I'm too close to it, whereas I'm not very close to the 1940s, obviously.
Yeah, we grew up in the 90s. So to us, it's really not... I mean, yeah, it's different now.
That 30 years ago doesn't feel it, though.
No. Because you still had a lot of the same modern conveniences as you do now, just, in a slightly less modified and slower form.
Yeah. Without Blockbuster, Radio Shack, the payphones, and a few of the radio bangers, there would be parts of this film that would be difficult to tell that it's not modern at all, especially when it's half a space movie and it's very contemporary. Like, it's very similar to Guardians of the Galaxy in the way that the space stuff looks and is presented. Hala looks a lot like we'd expect the Creed to look. It looks a lot like the Nova building that we get to see in Guardians of the Galaxy, actually.
It has...
their space jumping looks the same. The spaceship interiors look the same. We share characters.
Let me speak. You keep going on over me. I was gonna say that Hala basically looks like that the city of Los Angeles from Blade Runner if it wasn't, covered in a massive cloud of pollution. Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah, because that one part where they're, like, going on the
a lot of the
train.
A lot of the buildings looked that way, too. Mm-hmm. It's basically what a lot of those metropolises would look like without all the pollution that seems like every writer agrees on is gonna happen in the future.
Oh, I'm sure. Sure.
That's one thing I've noticed about a lot of those movies, is that every time we see them, it's very dark, it's very gross looking.
Well, we don't live necessarily in one of those places, but there are places that do look a lot like that already.
Yes.
Sadly.
Meanwhile, during 2020, when most of India had to, like, stay inside, I remember those pictures that came out of, like, the square, or, like, one of those very popular...
You mean Italy?
No, it was in India.
Oh, there was the Italy one where everyone was talking about the dolphins in Venice.
No, I was talking... There was these two pictures that came out of India where you had the picture where a bunch of people were on their scooters and everyone was out and how it looked just perpetually foggy all the time. And then you had the picture of how it looked when everyone had been in lockdown for several weeks. And you could actually see the sky. It's
very similar. There was a lot of, the nature's healing itself. No, it just means everybody was inside.
Yeah.
Sadly. But again, the 90s not necessarily feeling like the 90s is not really a fault of the movie, which does actually do a lot to recreate the period with its music, the costumes, and the bright desert settings, especially the way that it films road trips feels extremely like a 90s road trip movie. But it also does the buddy cop thing, and that's incredibly intentional, given that buddy cop things were huge in the late 80s, early 90s. Sam Jackson was even in, like, a parody of Lethal Weapon.
They were everywhere.
Well, and Sam Jackson was in a parody one, and they used that to actually recreate his de-aged look.
And even Predator 2 was kind of like that, where Danny Glover is dealing with a space invasion.
Well, and you have the other Sam Jackson movie, like the third Die Hard.
I think he was actually in Los Angeles, too, actually.
Die Hard was?
No, Predator 2.
Oh, I don't know.
Which...
There's a lot of stuff in Los Angeles in the 90s, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Whereas the MCU is usually very, 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 very focused on New York.
Yes.
Like, very focused on New York.
So much.
Actually, thinking about it, that means that Sam Jackson works for Daniel Sosa's arm of S.H.I.E.L.D. because they were in L.A.
Oh?
That means they worked initially for the West Coast branch of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Ooh.
Got him!
Got him. Hell yeah.
I didn't even think about that until right now where you mentioned L.A. and I'm like, oh my god, that's right.
And then he loses an eye.
Poor Sam. Well, not Sam Jackson. Nick. Nick Fury loses an eye.
Yes, Nick loses an eye.
Now that's a point where, okay, if it didn't work for you, I can see why there are a lot of, like, prequel-esque moments here that can feel kind of heavy-handed, such as how Nick loses his eye.
How Han Solo got his blaster.
Oh, we don't talk about Solo in this JoJo, not today.
Not today, not ever.
Oh God. Oh, God help me.
See, even you have those movies that you don't even want to touch or think about.
Oh, I know. But again, I'm not going to say that it's objectively bad, because unless it's a literal filmmaking thing that failed, I don't think that that's what we were looking at here.
No.
I still don't.
No.
Cinematographer. Oh, sorry.
They're just one addition. Like, there are bad Marvel movies, and there are great Marvel movies.
Mm-hmm.
But do I think this was a great movie? No. But I
do.
I think it was far from bad. I think it was a good movie. I think it was I think it was perfectly serviceable as far as MCU movies go, and I think it was a good origin movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it works
on
all cylinders. Cinematography for the film was actually done by Ben Davis, who tried to achieve a dated look, which, to be fair, is difficult with digital filming. Unless you're going to be Quentin Tarantino doing The Hateful Eight, you can't really create...
No.
You really can't recreate film on film to a perfect degree without doing it literally that way. And that movie had a lot of screening issues. The film would burn apart and melt and whatever. It didn't even really look all that different from the regular version of it, so I don't...
And hell, you're not even going to be able to replicate a lot of the way movies looked from the 60s and 70s because they stopped using the Technicolor process.
Yeah, the coloring doesn't even look the same.
Like, The Godfather was the last film... The Godfather or The Godfather Part 2 was the last film that they used the Technicolor process on.
Yeah.
So, movies in general are not going to ever look like they used to.
No.
From a certain period.
Well, that, and this is the 21st film. Marvel's gonna have a house style by now.
Yeah.
And Ben Davis is actually very well acquainted with this house style because he worked on Guardians of the Galaxy, which is why the space stuff looks so consistent. He's worked on Age of Ultron. He worked on Eternals. And he's also a frequent collaborator with Matthew Vaughn, who has a tendency to lean into both fantasy and period pieces, at least recently.
Yes.
He's worked on Matthew Vaughn doing The Kingsman, Stardust, Layer Cake, and Kick-Ass. Same cinematographer.
And yes, we do mean The King's Man.
Not The Kingsman. Or, that doesn't have a the in it, it's just Kingsman.
Yeah.
Not Men, The King's Man, the one that just came out a couple months ago.
Which was actually very good.
It was such a good movie. It was lovely. Davis also has cinematography nominations for his work on 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Which is also a great movie.
So the argument that this film doesn't have any style to it, I would argue differently. The style actually comes in the imitation of the period, much like the first Avenger did, while still making its own. It remains consistent, like I said, with Guardians of the Galaxy and Cosmic Marvel settings, as well as the bright lighting and the yellowed tint of the Earth settings, again, with the road trip movies. It gives the dated props and the settings just that slight hint of nostalgia that you wouldn't get if you didn't use that filter.
Yes.
But, it may not go as hard as, the heavy ombre and orange wash that was in Top Gun when you're outside in the outdoor scenes and it's all just orange. Or the sunsets are they go from orange to purple very obviously.
Or, all the use of fog machines.
Oh, good. Yeah, it could have done it. To be fair, Captain Marvel could have used more fog machines. They loved fog machines in the 90s.
They could have used more fog machines, maybe a little more gradient. You take my breath away.
Also, if we're talking about obvious music choices, did you want it to be more Kenny Loggins? Did we want to use Danger Zone literally 15 different times in the same film? I'd say that's more obvious than queuing up No Doubt over a fight scene.
Yeah, over a singular fight scene. Though, to be honest, maybe they should have used Chumbawamba in that.
I get knocked down and I get up again. And I get up again. Yeah,
yes.
I did think that too.
That would have been awesome, actually.
I don't remember if that was too late 90s as well. I don't remember.
It might have been. That might have been why they didn't use it.
I mean, I'm almost to soundtrack, so I'll get there, but I don't remember. It still evokes the feel of the 90s, especially with the road trip films, the buddy cop thing. I would argue that is really its style.
Yeah.
There's also the point where it imitates that chase scene from the French Connection.
Yes.
Even though that's the 70s, but it feels very like if you took the French Connection and melded it with that driving scene from the opening of Pulp Fiction, you'd get that scene with Sam, or with Nick in the car following Veers on the train.
You compare the two scenes and it is you see the immediate influence of the French Connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
it's just with less squibs and blood.
Yeah, but we did get an old lady punched in the face, and that was pretty great.
That was great.
I still love that. I actually missed the first time I watched it that she bumped into that lady prior. And I was like, how did she know?
That's how she
Because she knew. She saw that lady first, and she would know because she's fighting people who shapeshift, and she knows that.
Fuck you, old lady. Like, bam!
Well, and I find it funny that, was Matthew Vaughn the one that worked on First Class?
Yes.
I find it very interesting that the Skrulls actually imitate Mystique a lot, given that the cinematographer works with Matthew Vaughn so much.
Well, I mean, she has the same shape-shifting ability. It's just she was the only one on Earth who technically could
do that.
Yeah, and
because
now
she was a mutant rather than an alien.
Now there's a whole fucking alien race!
Which is how retconning the X-Men in is going to be real weird, but we'll see what they do and whatever.
I'm not
for today.
I'm not really looking forward to it. I mean, maybe they could surprise me. Maybe I won't hate it, but I don't know, man.
It's not for today. It's fine.
Not today.
Captain Marvel is also one of the first MCU films to dive into full runtime de-aging effects, namely with Samuel L. Jackson, though you see it with Clark Gregg's cameo as well. This is opposed to the effects being used for a few short appearances, so you do see it in other films such as Ant-Man or Endgame.
Yeah,
but they don't do it through the majority of the film. It's just like a scene here or there.
Yeah.
These effects were done by a company named Lola, and they are also responsible for pre-Serum Steve in the first Avenger.
They were... I'm gonna be a little shady and be like, were they at... I take it they were not involved in de-aging Hank in the Ant-Man, because that was a little too uncanny valley for me.
I don't remember if they were or not. I didn't look.
As someone who has watched a lot of Michael Douglas movies, especially when he was younger, like Basic Instinct younger and shit, seeing that...
Yeah, especially since we watched that really recently.
Yeah, seeing that was, I remember just leaning back in my chair going, what the fuck?
That is how I feel at the end of Rogue One, but I will not get there here either.
We will get there eventually.
Yeah. Samuel L. Jackson's look was defined by his role in a few key 90s films with two obvious exclusions. Pulp Fiction could not be used due to Jackson's facial hair, makeup, and styling, because he didn't look the same at all.
No.
And Jurassic Park could also not be used. It had to be omitted because Jurassic Park attempted to actually make Jackson appear older than he was in 1993. When the point is to try and make him look younger, that's pretty counterproductive. So instead, Lola referenced Die Hard with a Vengeance, which was out in the late 90s, Loaded Weapon, which was that National Lampoon's parody of Lethal Weapon.
Yes.
And 187, the latter being the heaviest reference that they used for young Samuel Jackson.
Yes.
And that one was the one you were talking about where he played a teacher?
Yes.
Right?
I always, I'm not gonna lie, I get those movies confused with the Morgan Freeman one, where he has to go in and clean up this school that is just, like, on the brink of destruction from the inside out. I always get them mixed up. Because they're they have very similar premises, I feel like.
And mean fair. If you do a lot of stuff with Inner City, it's gonna feel similar.
Unfortunately.
So, on top of being the first female-led film for Marvel, and the first with a female director, it is also the first to boast a female composer. The score is composed by Pinar Toprak, I really hope I'm saying that right, who gave the film an electronica-infused score in the vein of, like, the Marvel fanfare meeting Tron Legacy. I hear a lot of complaints that it's too Mass Effect, but it's a space movie, so it should feel pretty Mass Effect-y.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point. But
I would rather it sound Mass Effect-y than, like, every other token Marvel soundtrack.
Well, and it kind of infuses that Marvel Avengers-esque feel.
Yeah.
But it gives it kind of this vaporwave undertone because of that electronica infusion. And to me, the electronica parts of it sound a lot more like old 90s arcade games than it does contemporary sci-fi, which puts it more aligned with, like, vaporwave, which makes it fit a lot more as a 90s movie than it would otherwise. So it worked for me. It doesn't work for a lot of people. I do hear that complaint a lot. I think it works fine, mostly because it's a sci-fi movie. It fits the movie's tone. It still fits in line with all of Marvel's other stuff.
I liked the electronica notes in there. If anything, I not only felt it was fitting, but it helped distinguish it from other Marvel soundtracks, which unfortunately a lot of them do all sound the same. There's not really anything remarkable or memorable about them. Only a few of them actually stand out.
A lot of the scores are really, really similar.
Yes. I mean, I understand why.
Yeah.
Like, I understand why, because I guess, like, they all want to get that theme in there. Sure.
Well, a house style. That's what it is. They're all just kind of borrowing from each other, and that's fine. But it can make some of the music pretty unremarkable otherwise.
Yes.
This film also uses a wide swath of 90s pop music releases, and we've talked about that a little bit, for Carol's time on Earth, including Salt and Peppa, No Doubt, Nirvana, as well as classics like The Marvelettes, Heart, Guns N' Roses, a bunch of other stuff.
Which she was wearing the Guns N' Roses top, too, which I thought was a very nice touch.
Yes.
Along with her, one year for Halloween going as Janis Joplin.
This makes me want Carol hanging out with
Peter.
Quill
Yes.
so much more. And I know that that's a comics thing, and they've done that before, and I love their dynamic in the comics a lot. Especially that, like, you're not very good with kids, are you? No, usually I am. It's so good, but I really want it in the films more than we have gotten it, which is not at all. The like I talked about earlier, the use is initially very specific to Earth, and then it's melded into the soundtrack for the rest of the story in greater amounts as Carol comes in more into her agency.
Yes.
So I feel like this is a deliberate choice where a lot of people feel like it's out of place. I don't think it is.
Like, I'm sure that the lack of 90s music, like, from the beginning probably made it feel like it wasn't very 90s.
But she's not connected to her life in the 90s, especially
Yeah,
since
it
she
makes-
left Earth in 1989. She wouldn't be connected to the 90s.
Yeah,
She'd be
that's-
connected to 1989.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It makes sense for the more she becomes reacquainted with the Earth and basically what is essentially her actual identity and her human self, we hear more 90s music.
Yeah.
That actually feels like a nice, deliberate choice
Yeah.
that they made.
Yeah. Like, not everything's going to be Peter Quill, and that's fine because Peter Quill's music plot line works very specifically for his story
Yes.
in a way that would not work with other people if you tried to do that. Though you do have the quiet little nod to it when Monica's listening to her CD Walkman,
Yeah.
when they're trying to load the black box on Maria's, like, old Windows 95.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, put your Peter Quill headphones on.
Heck yeah. But it's very specifically a CD Walkman versus a cassette Walkman. Because everyone's using, like, CD drives and they take forever to load. It's so funny.
Not a Zune anymore.
No. Well, not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. In part of the contentious reaction to the film and forced injection of gender politics under the guise of complaining that the film caters too much to a gendered feminist agenda, Top Rack was specifically targeted for her work on the score. A film website called Screen Geek alleged that after release, that Marvel had been unhappy with Top Rack's composition and had quietly replaced her with Michael Giacchino, I think that's how you say that, who composed the infamous fanfare that opens every MCU show and film, the logo music.
Yeah.
And it should be said at this point that assuming that her work was Giacchino's says that there is nothing wrong with the score, and plenty about that assuming a woman could not compose something so fitting with Marvel's established style. Yeah. Because if you're going to go afterward and go, no, it was secretly this dude who already worked on stuff, that tells me that the music fits in fine with his other work if you're willing to buy some conspiracy that he secretly wrote it.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't tell me that there was anything wrong with the score at all. It tells me that it fits along with Marvel stuff so well that you were more willing to give a dude credit for it than let it stand on its own, because you can argue that this film has a feminist agenda all you want. I won't really believe it, but that argument falls flat, cough, cough, when you're the one forcing the argument in there and kind of proving the necessity of it in the first place.
Yeah, like... It's also really funny to hear this when literally the composer for Joker, also a woman, won the Oscar for her score on that movie.
But Joker wasn't about a woman. That's the difference. It's because they kept getting mad that all of these, like, first female this, first female that, and they felt like something was being taken away, so somebody had to go and create a conspiracy that they'd quietly replaced this woman's work when they hadn't. And Michael Giacchino emphatically denied this in a response. He did admit that he'd given some feedback to her on occasional cues, but said this was only offered as a supporting member of the Marvel family. Again, because people want things to fit in line with the greater universe of stuff.
Yeah.
That's house style.
And unlike Phase 1, where they were still trying to find their footing, by this point, they know what they want out of a Marvel movie, and there are a lot more hands and cooks in the kitchen.
as evidenced by how many writers this film has.
Yeah.
There are a lot of arguments, too, that it has too many writers, and this is why it's so messy, but no, I'd argue that this is just what happens when you have a universe that has so many different input, like, parts of input required to make it consistent with other parts.
And honestly, I would argue that this is one of the more cohesive plots that we've had put in a Marvel movie, whereas others get straight up messy.
Yeah, we'll get to that later, because otherwise we will be here for another half hour.
Yes.
Giacchino also said that he did not write the score to Captain Marvel, quote unquote, and that, quote, Toprak is a fabulous composer and certainly doesn't need me.
Yeah, which I think says a lot.
Let's see. So...
Like, it says he actually has not only respect for her, but respect for her as a fellow composer, and is like, no, she did this, and she deserves the credit for it.
Also, where did this come from?
Yeah. Like
where did that come from, other than the politics that we're insisting aren't here, but we're gonna force to be in here anyway?
Yeah. Like, this was just going to be a movie about Carol Danvers, and then the minute all of this stuff starts coming out, people start insisting that this movie is this. They insist upon it, is what it is. They insist upon this movie being something when all it was trying to be was a movie for Carol Danvers.
Exactly.
And then out of nowhere, we get all of this loud screeching about, oh, well, the feminist agenda and all this crap, when it's like...
That's not at all what it is. No.
Like, it does. It's been insisted upon this movie, and now this movie has to deal with that being attached to it the same way Moonlight has to deal with, you know, being attached to La La Land forever now.
That poor movie.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, we've talked about, like, the one thing that makes me sad about this film when you get into, like, story and tone, and again brings up how this film is really not giving equal footing on anything,
No.
is how I really, really, really wanted that one scene where Carol falls into the Blockbuster to bring back video rental the way that Guardians of the Galaxy reintroduced everyone to the cassette audio tape.
Yeah.
I really wanted it to. Obviously it didn't.
No. I mean, there still is one running Blockbuster.
No, I think it finally closed.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Yeah, there are no more Blockbusters anymore. You can find, like, indie little rental places here and there, but...
Well, it's official. The Dude Bros killed Blockbuster.
Not just the millennials anymore.
We couldn't kill Blockbuster with our avocado toast.
And this movie also leans heavily into Secret Invasion well before they'd even announced Secret Invasion as a thing.
Yeah.
And you see that with a lot of nods with Monica's influence, especially with her mom, and the nod to her superhero name with Maria's call sign being Photon.
Yes.
And then you also have Monica's very open reactions and, like, open respect for the Skrulls. Mm-hmm. Where she's, like, telling them not to change, and no, I really like the way that you look, and, you know, all this stuff, and it's just like, you can see that there is a reason why she is the one that they specifically go to at the end of WandaVision to kick off Secret Invasion. But you can see that even from here.
Which I'm still kind of wary on how they're gonna do that. I mean, like I said, I have way more interest in the Skrulls now than I ever used to, but I'm still like about how it's handled.
We'll see. We'll see how it goes, I guess. But I hope that they handle it okay, because Monica was honestly one of the best things about WandaVision for me.
Yeah, she was.
And she in this film plays a very thematic, similar character to Sharon Carter.
Yes.
When you talk about how the setup of Captain Marvel is a lot like Steve, though Carol's brother's name is Steve, also, surprise. You have Carol as Steve. You have a Peggy figure in there who's kind of Nick, but Nick is also kind of Bucky, even though Carol is kind of Steve and Bucky at the same time. We don't give guff to Bucky for being an amnesiac, but we do Carol.
Yeah, we don't give Sebstan any guff for his acting as the Winter Soldier and basically being a blank slate for what, 2 movies?
Several.
Like, he did not get a genuine personality until The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which just came out last year. He has been in several movies, and I haven't heard one single solitary, fart in the wind about him and his wooden acting. Yet, Carol, if Brie Larson does one movie where she's the lead, and just endless derision. And again, we're going to keep coming back to this because the vitriol for this movie is not justified. It really
isn't.
The level of vitriol that this movie has not only attached to it, but thrusted upon it.
People act like this is worse than the Incredible Hulk.
When everybody,
they really do.
When everybody wants to forget the Incredible Hulk even existed. Including
Disney,
the MCU. Including Disney.
Yeah.
They don't even have it on Disney+.
Well, the MCU in general has retconned parts of the Incredible Hulk out as much as possible, other than, like, the most that they keep it around for is gamma radiation, and I know we went over that with Agent Carter last episode, too.
They did reference it in What If, in that one episode, but aside from that, you actually have a hard time finding this movie anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's not even the Ang Lee version.
Which is actually easier to find.
Yes, for some reason. But no, the one that actually has Tony Stark in an end-credits scene waltz in, or mid-credits scene, or whatever. It's been a long time since I've seen it. You have him attached to that movie, and yet...
I mean, we'll get there in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we will. And yet no one wants to act like that movie exists. But no, Captain Marvel is the worst Marvel movie.
It also successfully evokes Terminator 2 a lot, and
it
very
does.
well. I still feel like it feels a lot like a 90s movie.
It does.
And there are varying arguments here, whether it's not 90s enough or it's too nostalgia-driven. I feel like that's a subjective argument. That doesn't make it good or bad. It just means you didn't like the nostalgia in it, or you thought that it needed more of it.
Stranger Things is purely nostalgia driven for the 80s, yet people love that.
Yeah.
Is including a lot of the same people we watched. Their reviews of Stranger Things were glowing. So I'm just kind of like, now nostalgia driven isn't a good thing, but it's good though when you like the thing. It's bad when you don't like the thing. Okay.
Right.
Guys, again, it's okay if you don't like the movie, but your arguments are they're bullshit.
On that note, how would you rate this movie?
How would I rate this movie?
Yeah. On the same rating scale that we've been using for everything else, out of 5.
I would give it, honestly, I'd give it a 4-star rating at this point. I don't think it's a great movie, but I do think it's a very good origin movie. I think it does a lot of the tie-ins pretty well, and I think it actually tackles cosmic Marvel while also bringing it back down to earth in a relatively understandable way instead of trying to make it too convoluted or too surreal or anything. I also really liked... I really enjoyed Carol's arc. I enjoyed the fact that she got to discover who she was and take her agency back. I liked that. I really liked that, and, you know, I get this isn't other people's bag, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It just means it's not your bag.
I remember liking this movie actually a lot more on this rewatch than prior, and I have watched it a few times prior. But the first few times I watched it, I didn't actually feel like it was all that nostalgic, but again, I feel like I'm too close to the 90s to really get the pure nostalgia out of it like I would out of an 80s thing where I was born in the 80s, fine, but I'm not as closely connected to the 80s as I was the 90s.
No, I was
so the
born in
80s can
late
still
80s.
feel very like vibey and an era for me because it's
I
it's
grew up
foreign
in-
enough to me.
I grew up in the 90s. That's what I remember.
But I feel like on this rewatch, I appreciated the nostalgia a lot more. I really liked the music a heck of a lot more than I remember even noticing it the first couple times I watched it. So I ended up, I already had it at a 4.5 on Letterboxd. I left it at a 4.5. I still think that Nirvana musical cue is fucking art. It is high art. It is perfect. It is on par with those music cues in Guardians of the Galaxy that just pop off and they land and they're perfect. Like that opening to Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Yeah.
So good.
Yes.
So good. So honestly, I left it at a 4.5. I'm not going to rate it at a 5.5 because I do still have kind of some plot questions about it here and there.
Yeah.
No, it is not a perfect film, but it really works for me. The only thing that really doesn't is, I mean, it suffers some of, the Marvel origin flaws where you kind of have the lackluster villain. I mean, Yon-Rog's okay, and he's better than some of them. Don't get me wrong, there are some villains that were used far worse than this. But could he have been a little more dynamic and a little more involved? Yes. So yeah, there are some things I feel like it could have done just a little bit better. There are some opportunities I feel like it could have capitalized on that it didn't quite. But otherwise, great fucking movie.
And honestly, yeah, I think part of what this movie suffered from was just a bunch of people really getting a bug up their butt over the wrong things, feeling threatened where they didn't have to. I think
or just being so exhausted by the conversation that, yeah, the conversation did feel unnecessary at that point. But you contributing to that conversation is not making it better.
No. Also, trying to act like, you're not contributing to it, or that, your attitude or point of view isn't colored by it at all, also doesn't help it.
No.
It's okay to not like this movie if you don't like it. I feel like you need to bring better arguments to the table. I think you need to do your research. If you're gonna, try to discredit this movie and poo-poo on it to the extent that some people have.
Well, and claiming that you're not interested in the politics of this movie while immediately going to talk about the politics of the movie kind of undermines your argument that you're not interested in the politics of the movie. You're incredibly interested in the politics of the movie.
You're also letting a lot of your own opinions color what you're saying, which
what you think is the quality of the film, when objectively giving it a look as a film, which is what many people claim to do and still don't quite, I don't think that there's really anything all that wrong with it. It has some holes here and there plot-wise, fine, but again, it doesn't have anything to prove to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think. Does it look like I give a diddly damn what you think, Jeremy? No. No, I diddly don't.
Just that.
Just that.
Just that.
That's basically what our argument really is.
And that's Captain Marvel. Thanks for listening to this episode of FANSPLAINED. If you enjoy what we do, considering donating on Ko-fi. Everything we make goes right back into the production quality of the show, from equipment to our future website and more. We appreciate all of our subscribers and everything you do, and we're thankful for anything from Hulk smashing that like button to your questions and comments on each episode and sharing the show with your friends. FANSPLAINED is a weekly media criticism podcast and deep dive, and we are currently still working our way through the chronological order of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Next week, we'll be looking at the film that started it all, Iron Man. You can find our updates here on YouTube, as well as on Twitter and on Ko-fi at FANSPLAINED. If you want more of our conversations on the MCU and other fandoms, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for new episode notifications. Until next time, Salt Shakers, this has been Ryan.
And
with the Fansplained podcast. See you next week.